Good morning. So this is 415 Development and Growth. And today we're going to look at the measurement, basically the measurement of poverty and inequality. So these slides are either uploaded or I'm going to upload them after the class, okay? So again, this is chapter 5 from your textbook. So you must read, if you haven't already, you must read that chapter. So we're gonna talk about 5 particular things. One is measurement, all right? Then we talk about social welfare, how poverty and inequality affect social welfare. Then specifically, we're gonna look at the issue of absolute poverty. All right. Then we're gonna look at a microeconomic view on high poverty groups. So who are they? What are their characteristics in the society? I mean, in terms of education, health, etc. And finally, we will talk about some of the policy issues. Okay. So when we talk about inequality, of course, what we mean could differ across contexts. One type of inequality definition is about the personal distribution of income. All right. There is also, of course, functional distribution of income. Right. If we want to divide society into different social classes in terms of basically what is the source of their earnings. All right. So there could be capitalists, there could be landowners, there could be workers. Right. So we can look at that type of inequality that is called functional inequality or functional distribution of income, all right? Or as in here, we can look at the personal distribution of income, right? So in that personal distribution, we do not really group people into different social classes depending on their earnings, but we just measure their total income. Usually by conducting surveys, field surveys, right? And that's usually, of course, not the entire society, but a random sample that is representative enough, right? So that sample should be large enough so that it represents the entire society. Then we look at the distribution of it. So distribution in the sense of a particular probability distribution, right? So distribution of income according to the size class of persons, for example, the share of total income accruing to the poorest specific percentage or the richest specific percentage of the population. Okay, so you must have some familiarity with the Gini index, right? So this is basically about that, right? So in Gini index, usually you divide society into 5 different classes, right? The first 20%, the second 20%, but you can do it in a finer way, right? So you can divide the society into 10,000 bins, all right? 10,000 different levels of income. So when this distribution is skewed, all right, so when the shape of this distribution is not uniform or normal, we talk about, of course, some serious degree of inequality, right? So overall, we say there is income inequality if this distribution is disproportionate. All right. So let's look at some examples here. Okay. Now here we divide society into quintiles or deciles. Okay. So if you look at individuals, so here we have 20 individuals, all right? The first 5, the next 5, all right, that goes on. So if you look at the share of total income for the first 4 individuals, for instance, it's 5% of total, right? If you look at the last, you know, this quintile, so basically you add the units, all right? So if you look at in terms of deciles, the situation is of course different, right? Here you have 1.8, you see 1.8, then here you have 3.2, and that goes on. And as you see, there is an equality, right? Because a few people have largest levels, but the rest is pretty lower levels. Okay. So here it is important to be careful about the cumulative calculation here. All right. Now, this is the Lorentz curve. Lorentz curve is closely related, of course, with the Gini coefficient. Now here, on the horizontal axis, we have the percentage of income recipients. So this is how we divide the society, right? The bottom 10%, the next 10%. So this is here we rank these people. We rank these persons in terms of their income. Okay. Then in this curve, the curve with the dots on them, okay, the curve where there are the dots. So this is the Lorentz curve, and it tells me on the vertical axis what percentage of total income that particular group has, right? So for instance, the bottom 10% of people in this society at point A, they have less than 5% of income. Okay, then the next, if you look at the bottom 20% now, their share is about 5%. Okay, if you look at the bottom 30% of population in terms of income, their income share is about 10%. So as you see, if you move away from the line of equality, then inequality, of course, in the society increases, right? Because here, look at the top 10%. Okay, top 10% income is almost 40% of total, right? This vertical distance, because that part around 65% or around 60% is basically the income share of the bottom 90%, right? So the top 10% obtains a largest share of income in the society. Okay. So in the history of economic thought, this is slightly related with the, of course, Pareto law, right? So don't confuse this with Pareto efficiency, but Pareto, according to Pareto law, you know, wherever you look at, you see inequality in the nature, in the society, and usually the ratio is 4 to 5. I mean 1 to 4. All right. So if you look at the 20% of people, the top 20%, they obtain the 80% of income. If you look at the bottom 80%, they obtain the 20% of income. Of course, this is a huge generalization and usually not true empirically in every domain, but in the beginning of the 19th century, people were talking, or at the end of the 19th century, when Pareto wrote, so he was talking about such inequalities. Okay. Now the Gini coefficient, of course, is the you know, if this area is larger, right, then inequality is larger. So the share of this area within this triangle is giving you the Gini coefficient. Now you see two different societies, right? On the left, you see a relatively equal distribution, okay, and on the right, you see a relatively unequal distribution. All right. So in reality, there's almost there's I mean, nowhere in no society, no geography, no history, no episode, there is perfect equality. All right. So we don't really observe perfect equality in reality. But historically, of course, inequality changes, and we're going to discuss that as well. Now, again, the Gini coefficient, as I just mentioned, the shaded area divided by the total area of this triangle. All right, because that gives you a percentage measure of how large the inequality is. Right, if you go like this, for instance, if your Lorentz curve is close to point C and away from the line of equality, then inequality is larger. And that's a pretty basic formulation of inequality in a society. That's not the only one, and there are some deficiencies. Sometimes we look at this ratio. Sometimes we just look at top 10% share of income divided by bottom 10% share of income, all right? Or top 20% share of income, okay, divided by top 20% share of income. So there are such ratios that we also use, and there are some other indexes such as Thale index, Atkinson index, and if I have time, I'm going to discuss these as well. Okay, I can actually send one of my seminar presentations when I discussed wealth inequality. Okay, now this is a pretty simple depiction of functional distribution of income, right? This is a, you may imagine this is the labor market, right? So on the horizontal axis you have employment, on the vertical axis you have the wage rate. There's this labor supply curve, there's the labor demand curve. The labor demand curve, of course, reflects the firm's optimal decision in terms of hiring. So marginal productivity of labor is equal to the wage. And then if there is an equilibrium, then we have a wage rate here and employment here. So that sort of characterizes the surplus of different classes of people, right? So we have the firm owners, so they got the profit, and we got wages here, so they got the remaining part, right? So, but that is of course a very simple, very highly simplified view of functional income distribution. In general, you can discriminate different people according to their source of income. All right, so land, labor, capital, other types of services they supply to factor markets. So they all can be used to discuss functional distribution of income. Of course, one general understanding, starting with the classical political economy of 18th century, is that okay, there is this landowner class, the aristocracy, and there is this working class, proletariat, and then there is the capital owners or the bourgeois. So the society is composed of these three different classes. This is the kind of the Ricardian or classical view. Then in Marx, of course, Marx collects workers in one side and the others on the other side. because workers are the ones who have nothing but their labor to sustain their lives, etc. Right? So much of classical and neoclassical growth theory is about, of course, I mean, gives you some concrete ideas about functional income distribution, because if you look at the data, I mean, if you imagine that there is some sort of a production function that represents the production of the entire GDP of a country, then you look at the factor payments in the simple neoclassical model, for instance, we discussed in a couple of weeks ago. There is this production function, remember, which is Cobb-Douglas shape, right? So there's K to the alpha, L to the 1 minus alpha. So then if markets are competitive as well, so firms pay the marginal productivities to the factors, and then the entire income, of course, is divided across society. But income shares in such a case, if utility function is constant in terms of scale, the income shares are stable and equal to alpha and 1 minus alpha, right? So the total income paid for capital, its share in GDP, for instance, will be alpha, and it's 1 minus alpha for the workers. Now, in reality, these are not really stable, okay? Especially after the late 70s, we see a decrease in labor share, labor income share to be more specific, and an increase in capital income share in developed countries. So you may want to check, for instance, Thomas Piketty's work on this. Okay, so this was the general introduction to measuring inequality. As I said before, there are other indexes, Thale index and Atkinson index. Your textbook, I'm sure, talks about these things. So you're gonna read that. But let's talk about poverty now. Remember the first week we actually talked about poverty, but now we're gonna be more specific about some definition, right? One is this: so absolute poverty is the situation of being unable or only barely able to meet the subsistence essentials of food, clothing, and shelter. All right. So remember the Amartya Sen's approach, right? So we have objectives and values, and one of these are basic the sustenance of life, right? So we want the society at large to have enough income to pay for such subsistence goods. And so by subsistence goods, we mean, of course, food, clothing, and shelter in general, right? So if you do not have enough income to meet these objectives, then there's absolute poverty. Okay, the headcount index is an index that measures the share of population basically living below a particular poverty line. All right. Now, poverty lines could be different. You can define poverty line in terms of local currency, for instance, in terms of Turkish lira, or you can do it in terms of dollars. Usually, we look at a common currency, right? So that's usually US dollars, but then you can change it. You can look at annual income, or you can look at monthly income, but typically we look at daily income. All right. So total income divided by the entire number of days in a year. Then you have a particular line. For instance, you can calculate the headcount index for $1 per day. Okay, so if your poverty line is $1 per day, then you can look at the income levels of people on a daily basis, And then you can tell me the proportion of people who are living with an income level less than $1 per day. Then you can look at $2, you can look at $3, $4, $5. There are mid values like 1.2, 2.4, etc. But the idea, of course, is that if you think about the U.S. inflation, right? I mean, what a dollar is worth for, then you have to think about the in time that poverty line should also be changed. All right. And again, if you look at in dollars, you have to calculate incomes according to purchasing power parity corrections. Okay, because you have to be careful with the currency depreciation or appreciation, U.S. inflation, etc., etc. Then we have this definition of total poverty gap. So the sum of the difference between the poverty line and actual income limits of all people living below that line, right? So that gives you how serious you have poverty as a problem, right? Because that gives you the total measure, all right? So headcount index give you just how many people or what portion of society is below the line. But then if you look at the actual income levels and make this calculation, then you have the total poverty gap in the society. Okay. So each person below so you try to understand. So each person below the line will have an income level. Let's say, suppose that your poverty line is $2, and your headcount index is, let's say, 20%, right? So you have 20% of your population living with an income less than $2, but those income levels differ, right? For each person. Let's say you have 500,000 people living below that line. For each of these 500,000 people, you calculate the difference between their actual income and the $2. Okay, then that difference gives you, and the totality of these differences give you the total poverty gap. Okay. Now, one thing people realized, economists and development policymakers, etc., realizes that just looking at income is not really sufficient, right? We discussed some of the issues in the very beginning when we talk about Human Development Index, right? But later on, economists and development policy makers or philosophers, so they thought about, okay, how can we really measure poverty by introducing different values and different determinants of people's welfare. Okay, so multidimensional poverty index, there could be many different ways of creating a multidimensional poverty index, by the way, but in a typical definition, it identifies dual cutoffs for levels and numbers of deprivations, and then multiplies the percentage of people living in poverty times the percent of weight indicators for which poor households are deprived on average. So the idea is that you're not gonna look at just income, but you're gonna have different things. For instance, some health indicators, some education indicator, the type of the house they live in, whether this house is well heated in winter, etc., etc. All right, so there could be many different things that you can look at, and then of course you're going to create optimal weights. Some sort of optimality in terms of these weights should be adopted. So then you're going to tell me, okay, income is still an important aspect, so let's put some 30% of weight to income, then I have this 10 other indicators, then the remaining weights could be divided equally among them. So whether they can have you know, a rich enough diet that includes vitamins and different types of proteins, or what type of material is used to cover the floor of the house, or whether the toilets are in the house or in an outside unit, or whether the kitchen is shared with other households, etc., etc. Right? So you could imagine many different indicators. I want you to suggest, I mean, just to go to Turkstat website. By Turkstat, I mean, of course, TÜİK. Okay, so in the English literature, it is known as Turkstat. So they have this survey of income and living conditions, SILC. So this is originated as a European project, and then Turkey adopted that project as well. Let me write in the income. Okay. So in that, you see many different indicators for which data is collected through surveys, and here you see you're going to understand how multidimensional poverty index could be calculated using the SILC data. Okay. So the idea, of course, is multiplicity of deprivations, right? I may have income, I may be in a poor health condition. I may have education, but now I am unemployed. I would be unemployed. I had this job that pays me something, right? Some wage, but now there's COVID-19, and I was basically fired. So these multiple deprivations allow us to see the importance of many different aspects of poverty. All right, and as the slide underlines, there could be some negative interaction effects. Okay, because usually, as we discuss in a moment, in the next hour possibly, we're going to see that employment, income, health status, educational status, they're all usually correlated. Okay, so if you have a decent education, then you can more easily find a decent employment, a secure job with a good enough pay. Then you have your income, then you have your savings, so you start accumulating wealth. Then, I mean, for instance, you pay mortgages and you have a house. Then you have other components of wealth that increases your welfare. Okay, so we should look at such different components. Okay. So one example is here. So this is the canonical definition that is accepted by many. So here we have 3 dimensions. Okay, one is health, the other is education, the other is standard of living. Okay, in health, we look at two things: child mortality and nutrition. All right. So we want to create a system of health and an economic model to allow, to increase the survival probability of children. Okay, we don't want children to die. Okay, so if child mortality is high, then that's a very bad sign. All right. Then in the health dimension, we also have nutrition. Okay, whether you have, your daily calorie intake is important. Your weight loss would be important. If, for instance, at the date of the survey, people are going to ask you, the surveyors, they're going to ask you whether you have very fast weight loss of weight in the previous 6 months or 1 year. Okay, here we are talking about extreme cases of hunger and malnutrition. Okay, and that could be very important. All right, so we have about half a minute, a minute and 1.5 minutes. So let me stop here. Then we're gonna continue after the break. So it is 9:40. Let's say meet at 9:55. All right, at 9:55. So then we're gonna continue with our discussion. Okay, I'm ending this session now to meet you at 9:55.